Imagine walking into a city where silence itself feels like it's screaming. You look around and everywhere, literally everywhere you turn, there are human skulls stacked into towers. Not a few heads on spikes, not even a gruesome battlefield graveyard. No. I mean entire skyscraper-sized pillars made of bones, carefully arranged so this man could admire his artwork. And the guy responsible? Timur. Or as history likes to call him, Tamerlane the Great. Great. Yeah, sure. Great at what though? To make sure no one on Earth ever slept soundly again? You see, Tamerlane wasn't your run-of-the-mill conqueror who just wanted land or glory or a fancy palace to retire in. Nah. This man wanted fear, not just to be feared, but to make his name echo like a nightmare in the back of every mind from Delhi to Damascus. And boy, did he succeed. Now, before we dive straight into rivers of blood, and there will be plenty, you need to understand this guy's mindset. Tamerlane was born in the 14th century in what is now Uzbekistan, in a place that looked more like an endless desert than any kind of royal nursery. But don't let that fool you. He believed he carried the bloodline of Genghis Khan himself. The great Mongol terror was his idol, his blueprint, his spiritual granddad. And if you're wondering what happens when someone with a ruthless streak the size of Asia decides he's the next Genghis, the short answer is absolute carnage. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Picture this. You're a soldier in India. You and 200,000 others have already thrown down your weapons. You've surrendered. You're exhausted, terrified, praying maybe, just maybe, you'll be spared. After all, surrender usually means you live, right? Not with Tamerlane. To him, mercy was weakness, and weakness was disgusting. So what does he do? He orders the execution of all 200,000 of you. Men, women, children, it doesn't matter. You're marched out and slaughtered. Some were stabbed. Some suffocated. Some are buried alive. And when it's all done, he probably sleeps like a baby, because to him, this wasn't cruelty. This was strategy. And here's the worst part. He wasn't sloppy about it. These massacres weren't chaotic accidents. They were deliberate, calculated, almost ritualistic. In Aleppo, 20,000 citizens were decapitated. In Ifshan, 70,000. Tikrit, another 70,000. Baghdad, 90,000 heads roll. And just when you think the numbers can't get more absurd, you realize we're not even halfway through his kill count. Historians estimate that Tamerlane's campaigns wiped out 15 to 20 million people. Let that sink in. 15 to 20 million. That's not a body count. That's erasing entire civilizations from the map. Now here's the kicker. While all this was happening, he wasn't ashamed of it. He flaunted it. He would literally walk through his macabre towers of skulls, admiring the way they looked in the sunlight. That was his decoration. Forget paintings, forget statues. He collected human heads. And if you're sitting there thinking, wait, how did people follow this lunatic? Well, power is seductive. He was a master strategist, a brilliant tactician. He could win battles that should have been impossible. His men believed in him because he always delivered victory, even if the price was oceans of blood. Let me pause here, because it's tempting to reduce this to just numbers and atrocities. But imagine living it. Imagine being in a city that's just fallen to Tamerlane. The air is thick with smoke, the smell of burning flesh, rotting bodies, blood soaking the dirt, families clinging to each other as soldiers drag them apart, screams cut off mid-sentence, and the sound of thousands of skulls being stacked into hollow towers. Hollow, except for the echo of silence that follows. That's the reality people live through. And here's the insane part. This wasn't random madness. Tamerlane knew exactly what he was doing. Fear was his weapon, maybe even more powerful than his armies. Word of his brutality spread faster than his soldiers marched. Sometimes, entire cities surrendered without a fight, terrified by the stories. But surrender didn't always save them either, which left the rest of the world stuck in a horrific dilemma: resist and die violently, or surrender and still probably die. Now, you might be asking, why? Why this obsession with destruction? Was he just a sadist, born to bathe in blood? Or was there a deeper game here? That's the question that keeps historians awake at night. Some say it was about terror as a psychological weapon. Others argue it was about feeding his ego, proving he was the rightful heir to Genghis Khan's legacy of terror. Me? I think it's both. He wanted an empire, sure. But he wanted more than that. He wanted to be remembered. And guess what? He succeeded. We're still talking about him 6 centuries later. But don't think it was all fire and corpses. Tamerlane also had a strange side, a contradictory side. While his armies were painting the deserts red, he was also patronizing artists, scholars, architects. He built Samarkand into a jewel of a city, filled with stunning mosques, gardens, and palaces. A place of beauty in the middle of a wasteland of destruction, which makes him even harder to pin down. He wasn't just a brute. He was complicated, intelligent, even visionary. And somehow, that makes him scarier. Because if he were just a mad butcher, maybe history would have swallowed him up and forgotten. But a mad butcher who could also dream in marble and poetry? That's a legacy. That's a paradox. That's Tamerlane. And here's where things get really twisted. For all his power, all his terror, he didn't die in battle. He didn't get stabbed in the back by a rival. He didn't go out in some Shakespearean blaze of betrayal and vengeance. No, he died in 1405 of natural causes. Just old age. Fever. The kind of death he denied to millions. Doesn't that sting? A man who made rivers run red and built monuments from skulls, taken down by nothing more than his own body giving out. But don't relax yet, because the story doesn't end with his death. His shadow lingered long after he was gone. His empire cracked, splintered, but the memory of his cruelty, that lived on. His name was whispered, his massacres remembered. Even centuries later, rulers would invoke Tamerlane's name like a warning. Now imagine you're a citizen of Baghdad in the year 1401. It's a crisp morning, and you've just woken up to the sound of distant drums. Not festive drums, not wedding drums. War drums. Your stomach drops because you know exactly who it is. The name itself travels faster than his armies, Timur. Or, if you're whispering in fear like everyone else, Tamerlane. People start running through the streets. Some are grabbing their children, others are boarding up doors, as if wood could stop what's coming. You don't know what to do, hide, fight, or pray. Because here's the sick truth, none of those options will really save you. And then it happens. His army floods the city like locusts. Not hundreds, not thousands, hundreds of thousands. Armored cavalry, ruthless foot soldiers, banners waving in the wind. The ground shakes beneath their charge. The air fills with dust, smoke, and the sound of horns. And before the sun sets, Baghdad is no more. 90,000 people, gone, slaughtered, decapitated. 90,000. But Tamerlane isn't satisfied with just killing. No, that's too ordinary for him. He orders the heads to be collected, carefully, like trophies. His soldiers stack them into giant pyramids of skulls outside the city walls. Imagine walking past that, towering heaps of bone, eyes still hollow, jaws frozen mid-scream. That's your city's skyline now. Why? Because Tamerlane understood one thing better than anyone. Fear travels faster than armies. If you thought Baghdad fell brutally, imagine being the next city on his map. You'd hear the stories, see the survivors, and the terror would eat you alive before a single soldier even appeared on the horizon. Sometimes, entire cities surrendered before he arrived, hoping, begging, praying that maybe submission would save them. Spoiler, it rarely did. But let's rewind a bit. How did a boy from the steppes, born to a relatively minor noble family, become the terror of 3 continents? He wasn't born into vast wealth or unshakable power. He had to claw his way up, one brutal step at a time. And oh, did I mention he was crippled? Yeah. The name Tamerlane actually comes from Timur the Lame. An arrow wound left his leg and hand permanently damaged. Picture it, this man who could barely walk without a limp was somehow conquering empires like it was a board game. If that doesn't scream obsession, I don't know what does. And he played the game ruthlessly. He knew alliances were fragile, so he bit people with fear instead of loyalty. One day he'd swear fealty to a Khan, the next day he'd overthrow him. He used religion too, claiming he was a protector of Islam, while simultaneously butchering Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Hypocrisy was just another weapon in his arsenal. Now, let's take a detour to Aleppo. 20,000 heads. That's the tally there. When Tamerlane's army stormed the city, resistance was crushed instantly. Citizens were rounded up, soldiers executed, families torn apart. He ordered mass decapitations, and once again, because he had a flair for the theatrical, the skulls were piled into towers. Like a sick trademark, his calling card. You know how Nike has the swoosh? Tamerlane had skull towers. But Aleppo wasn't unique. In Tikrit, yes, the same Tikrit centuries later associated with Saddam Hussein, 70,000 people were beheaded. 70,000. Try to wrap your mind around that number. Entire populations erased in days. And then there was Delhi. Oh, Delhi. India wasn't just another conquest. It was a stage, a chance for Tamerlane to prove that even the richest, most vibrant kingdom could be crushed under his heel. The Delhi Sultanate was powerful, sophisticated, wealthy beyond imagination. Jewel-encrusted palaces, endless markets, a city bursting with life. But all that meant nothing when Tamerlane arrived. At first, the Sultan of Delhi tried to resist. Brave idea. Terrible outcome. Tamerlane crushed the army with brutal efficiency. And then came the aftermath. 200,000 prisoners, soldiers, and civilians alike lined up and executed. 200,000. The ground literally ran red with blood. Delhi, once the jewel of India, became a slaughterhouse. And here's the twisted irony. Tamerlane justified the massacre by claiming it was necessary to prevent rebellion, as if killing 200,000 people was just preventative maintenance. Now, let's step into Ifshan, 70,000 massacred. Step into Damascus, pillaged, enslaved, burned. Each city followed the same script. Resistance met with annihilation. Surrender often met with betrayal, and always the towers of skulls. It was as if Tamerlane was saying, "This is my art, my legacy, my message to the world." And yet, and this is the part that will make your head spin, when he wasn't orchestrating rivers of blood, he was building. He adored architecture. He turned Samarkand, his capital, into a paradise of turquoise domes, glittering mosques, and lush gardens. Imagine that, a man who decorated one city with beauty while decorating another with skulls. A schizophrenic mix of creativity and carnage. You might be thinking, how did people reconcile this? How could they follow him? Simple. He delivered results. His soldiers got paid, they got loot, they got victory after victory. Fear held his enemies in check, and ambition drove his men forward. The world bends for winners, even if they're monsters. But here's the detail that really makes your skin crawl. Tamerlane didn't see himself as a villain. He thought he was chosen. He believed his destiny was divine. Every massacre, every tower of skulls was in service of a greater vision. And maybe that's the most terrifying kind of leader, the one who thinks genocide is a holy duty. Now, you'd think someone who spent his life drowning nations in blood would meet a fittingly brutal end. But nope, the universe had other plans. In 1405, as he prepared to invade China, the ultimate conquest, he fell ill. Fever, old age, natural causes. After everything, the burning, the stabbing, the burying alive, he just died in bed. Anticlimactic? Yes. Infuriating? Absolutely. But in a way, poetic. The man who denied mercy to millions was granted the one mercy he never offered, a quiet death. When archaeologists finally opened Tamerlane's tomb centuries later, they found an inscription carved on it, a warning, a curse. It said, "Whoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I." Guess what happened next? So, remember that inscription on Tamerlane's tomb? The one that basically said, "Hey genius, don't touch me unless you want the end of the world?" Yeah, about that. Fast forward to June 1941. We're in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, deep inside a mausoleum called Giri Amir. A group of Soviet archaeologists, backed by Joseph Stalin himself, decide that the warning carved into Tamerlane's tomb is just superstition, folklore, peasant nonsense. And since Stalin wasn't exactly the type of guy to respect boundaries, or lives for that matter, he gave them the green light. Crack it open. Imagine it. The mausoleum is dark, the air heavy with centuries of silence. Dust motes swirl in the faint torchlight. Every creak of the coffin sounds like a scream waiting to escape. And then they see it, the sarcophagus. Stone, imposing, humming with history. The inscription etched on it like a dare: when I rise from the dead, the world will tremble. Do they stop? Of course not. They pry it open. And here's where it gets eerie. The very next day, literally the next day, Hitler launches Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in human history. Nazi Germany invades the Soviet Union. And it's not just a coincidence. The timing is too perfect. Stalin's scientists disturb Tamerlane, and suddenly Hitler comes crashing in with tanks and planes, killing millions. Tell me that doesn't feel like a horror movie. Now, whether you believe in curses or not, you can't deny the shiver that runs down your spine when history lines up that neatly. Because the Soviets? They freaked out. Stalin himself was rattled enough that 2 years later, he ordered Tamerlane's remains to be put back in his tomb with full Islamic rites. And wouldn't you know it, shortly after that, the tide of the war began to shift in the Soviets' favor. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe Timur was still pulling strings from beyond the grave. But let's rewind, because you need to understand why people even thought a curse like that was possible. Tamerlane wasn't just a conqueror. He was practically mythological in his own time. His name carried weight like thunder rolling over the horizon. And remember, this is a man who killed 15 to 20 million people. That's not just history. That's trauma carved into the collective memory of entire civilizations. When you stack that much bloodshed onto one human being, people start believing he's more than human, more than mortal. A force, a curse in the shape of a man. And honestly, he lived like one. Picture him in Samarkand, his capital city, striding through gleaming blue-tiled mosques and palaces he built with the wealth of the dead. He loved this city so much that he poured blood money into making it breathtaking. Gardens with fountains, buildings glittering with Persian artistry, madrasas buzzing with scholars. All while outside those polished walls, entire populations were rotting in mass graves. He created heaven in the middle of hell. And that's the paradox that makes Tamerlane so fascinating. Was he a barbarian or a visionary? A destroyer or a creator? The answer is infuriatingly both, which is exactly why his tomb feels like it could carry a curse. How do you bury someone who was two people at once, a man and a monster? Now let's zoom in on the campaigns again, because trust me, the nightmare reel isn't done playing yet. In Damascus, the people thought they could outwit him. They surrendered quickly, offered tribute, tried to appease him. And for a moment, it worked. He accepted. The city breathed a sigh of relief. But then, he changed his mind. He had the leaders executed, enslaved the citizens, and burned large parts of the city anyway. Because with Tamerlane, surrender wasn't safety, it was just an appetizer. In Persia, he had another trick. He'd order thousands of prisoners to be suffocated en masse in trenches, covered with earth until they choked. A slow, gasping, terrifying death. Why? Efficiency. Swords and arrows took too long. Then there were the towers of skulls, again and again. Baghdad, Aleppo, Isfahan, Delhi. Imagine the logistics. Collecting tens of thousands of heads, arranging them in geometric patterns like a grotesque Lego project. This wasn't impulsive rage. This was organized, methodical cruelty. And yet, back in Samarkand, he'd hold poetry readings. He'd commission astronomers to chart the stars. He'd design gardens. This man who murdered millions also loved roses. How do you process that? You don't. You just shiver. Now, here's the kicker. Even though Tamerlane justified himself as a warrior for Islam, his brutality didn't discriminate. Christian, Muslim, Hindu, it didn't matter. His sword didn't care what god you prayed to. His only god was power. And you can bet people noticed. To his enemies, he was a demon in human form. To his followers, he was destiny incarnate. To us, centuries later, He's a paradox we still can't fully untangle. But back to the curse. Let's play devil's advocate for a second. Maybe it wasn't supernatural. Maybe the timing of Hitler's invasion was just a tragic coincidence. Maybe Stalin put the body back because he wanted to play politics with folklore. But here's the thing. When enough people believe in a curse, it becomes real in its own way. Not through magic, but through fear. And fear, as Tamerlane himself proved, is the sharpest weapon in history. Tamerlane, the crippled warlord who painted the world red, dies of natural causes. His body sleeps in Samarkand, wrapped in legends, his tomb carrying a curse that supposedly sparked the bloodiest war the modern world has ever seen. So here's the question for you. Was Tamerlane truly dead in 1405? Or has he been living rent-free in our nightmares ever since? You've seen what he did in life. Millions dead, cities turned to graveyards, towers made of skulls standing like grotesque monuments to his ego. You've seen the paradox, how the same hands that signed orders for mass suffocation also designed gardens where roses bloomed. But what about after 1405? What happens to an empire built on fear once its architect is gone? Well, spoiler, it doesn't last. The Timurid Empire cracked almost as soon as Tamerlane's body cooled. His sons and grandsons squabbled like vultures fighting over scraps. Orders shifted, rebellions sparked, enemies circled like sharks that smelled blood. Fear, it turns out, is a fantastic short-term weapon, but it's a terrible foundation for stability. Because once the fearmonger is gone, what's left to keep the pieces together? And yet, in that chaos, something unexpected blossomed. Remember Samarkand, his glittering capital? While the political empire crumbled, Samarkand flourished into a cultural jewel. Under his descendants, especially his grandson Ulu Beg, the city became a beacon of science, art, and learning. Ulu Beg wasn't interested in skull pyramids, he was obsessed with the stars. He built one of the world's greatest observatories, charted celestial maps, and advanced astronomy centuries ahead of his time. Imagine that, the grandson of history's most feared butcher, standing at night under the same sky, choosing to map constellations instead of chopping heads. That's legacy too. Twisted, complicated, unexpected legacy. But here's the rub. Tamerlane's memory always had two faces. To some, he was a patron of culture, a builder of mosques, a dreamer who turned Samarkand into a storybook city. To others, he was a genocidal maniac who drowned nations in blood. Which one was he, really? The truth is maddeningly both. And maybe that's why he's still so magnetic, even centuries later. Now let's fast forward. Because Tamerlane's shadow didn't stop in the 15th century. Oh no. He kept showing up again and again, like a ghost that refuses to stay buried. In the 16th century, Babur, a descendant of Tamerlane, founded the Mughal Empire in India. You know the Mughals, Taj Mahal, peacock thrones, endless riches. That empire traces its lineage straight back to Timur. Think about that. One of the world's most celebrated monuments to love, the Taj Mahal, exists because of a bloodline rooted in towers of skulls. History loves irony. Even in modern times, Tamerlane's ghost keeps poking his head up. In Uzbekistan, he's celebrated as a national hero. Statues of him loom in city squares. His face stares down from banknotes. School children learn about his empire, his victories, his brilliance. And the skull towers, the massacres, the rivers of blood, those parts get glossed over, sanitized, because nations love their heroes, even if those heroes were nightmares to everyone else. But outside Uzbekistan, the story's darker. In Iran, India, Iraq, Syria, his name still drips with venom. He's remembered as the man who turned thriving cities into cemeteries, who left scars still felt centuries later. To them, he's not a hero. He's a curse. And maybe that's the truest thing about Tamerlane. He's whatever you need him to be. A hero, a tyrant, a builder, a butcher, a visionary, a demon. He's a mirror that reflects the fears and hopes of whoever's telling the story, which is why he refuses to fade away. But let's not kid ourselves. For all the paradox, for all the marble domes and poetry readings, his legacy is soaked in blood. 15 to 20 million people gone. That's not a strategy. That's not politics. That's not even war. That's slaughter on a scale that's hard to comprehend. Every statistic was once a human life, snuffed out to feed one man's obsession with fear. And yet, this is the part that should chill you to the bone. Fear works. It works so well that we're still talking about him today. Tamerlane proved that terror could be as powerful as any sword and maybe more enduring than any empire. And here's where I want to leave you. Close your eyes and imagine you're in Samarkand at dusk. The city glows with blue-tiled domes, the streets alive with merchants and scholars. Somewhere in the distance, roses bloom in a garden. And then just outside the gates, there's a tower. Not of marble, not of gold. A tower of skulls gleaming in the fading light. That's Tamerlane. Beauty and horror hand in hand. Always both, always inseparable. So, I'll ask you one last time. Was Tamerlane the Great a builder of civilizations or the destroyer of worlds? And maybe more importantly, if fear really is the sharpest weapon in history, how far are we right now from seeing another Tamerlane rise again? Think about that.